Hey, it's Jon Justice, and I am so glad that you're with the show this week as we continue to count down to the rise of Skywalker. And it's interesting, too, because going into the show this week, I had some fairly vague talking points that I wanted to get into, and we will get to those particular items, specifically talking a bit about Reylo and Destiny. Twitter has been a buzz over Reylo as of late. Well, I mean, look, it usually is, but this past week, for whatever reason, a lot of people have been putting out some really interesting Ben Solo, Kylo Ren, and Rey content, and a lot of items that Disney has put out themselves and Lucasfilm, focusing specifically on Destiny. So we're going to talk a bit about that. But first, we have a bunch of news items to get to, as I mentioned at the top of the show this week. And we'll start off here. Somebody got a hold of Anthony Daniels' new book and read the section where he talks at length about the rise of Skywalker. So I'm pulling this directly from Reddit to provide to you and some commentary, the details from Anthony Daniels' book. He was asked if he asked JJ, Anthony Daniels did, if C-3PO should have some sort of fitting end in Episode 9, and JJ apparently replied, not on my watch. So to me, and I haven't read into the comments on this, so I'm just giving you sort of my gut reaction. I'm actually reading all of these for the first time on the show. To me, I take that to mean that, he's not going out in this film. Is there a fitting end? And JJ saying, not on my watch. I interpret that as, no, you're not going anywhere in this film. All right. Anthony Daniels feels it's one of the first Star Wars films that respects 3PO's role in the team and doesn't take him for granted. The script was being rewritten often at some points. He never knew which of the current draft was the one that was going to be used, losing some 3PO moments that he really liked. He's haunted, doing that thing with my fingers, by a really good conversation between him and Poe that didn't make it into the film. I assume these are the types of items that we'll end up, seeing eventually on the deleted scenes, assuming they include it with the film, and I can't imagine that they won't with the physical release. He felt that Episode 7 and 8 left a bunch of threads and tatters that couldn't be tied up well, but he acknowledges some of the points in the rants on YouTube, but feels that 9 ties everything up well. I take a bit of an issue with a comment like that. A bunch of threads and tatters that couldn't be tied up well. It's all open to interpretation and opinion, obviously, but there are always places where you can go in a story. I mean, that's kind of the point. And so it's an interesting comment and an interesting take to say that there was things in tattered or threads that he didn't feel like could be wrapped up. It's like, well, no, we have a whole other story that we're going to end up telling. And so much of this, again, is really subjective, right? I mean, it really is. Like when I walked away from The Last Jedi, I was very much under the impression that you could kind of do whatever you wanted with The Rise of Skywalker. Well, I know a lot of people looked at The Last Jedi and said, well, how are they going to solve all this? There's not enough time to solve all these problems within the final film. And I'm exaggerating, but that's what a lot of people have said. And I never saw it that way. I thought that Rian Johnson did an amazing job of bringing the characters to a specific place that wasn't all that far off the mark of where they were at the end of The Force Awakens, but the characters themselves were fundamentally changed because of what they'd gone through. So that's an interesting comment that Anthony Daniels made, in my opinion. At one point, 3PO says the phrase, a common emblem, which he had trouble with. We've heard about this before. He feels The Rise of Skywalker gives him, Mark, Luke, a better chance to say goodbye, though it's not really clear if he means on film or on the set in real life. The scene with the whole team on the speeder across the desert on Pisano was choppy and painful, he said. During a scene where the team flees the Knights of Ren down narrow cobbled streets, he bonded with Kerry Russell over having uncomfy costumes. Okay, let's see. It's a really funny and entertaining memoir, says the person who read it, and I think it's interesting that they let him release release it with full The Rise of Skywalker anecdotes early, even non-spoiler ones. His experience in the suit on the original trilogy sounds like a nightmare. Also interesting, the writer goes on to say that Anthony Daniels feels the friendship between Luke and 3PO isn't really taken seriously by enough people. He thought they shouldn't have been split up in The Empire Strikes Back, and they should have had a goodbye in The Last Jedi. He feels that people forgot that Luke is his master, and that's important to 3PO. And again, all of this stuff is based so much on perception of how you look at these characters and those dynamics. And again, these are things that I never thought about. I thought that the way that they handled Luke in The Last Jedi and those final moments, even though apparently from what I remember, that was not in the original script. Mark Hamill was actually the one who had said that there needed to be a moment there between him and C-3PO on Crate, and that Luke walking by and giving the wink to 3PO, Master Luke, was that sort of fitting end. And I thought that was. I mean, at the end of the day, at least in my opinion, okay, I know they have personalities, but they're also droids. Again, I'm not downplaying C-3PO or R2-D2. I'm just saying, we got to have levels of priority with characters in films. And I know for a lot of people, the nostalgia factor of the droids is hugely important. And it is for me, too. Growing up as a kid, I remember having this glossy image. It was one of my favorite images as a kid growing up, but it was this glossy image of a completely cleaned up. As a matter of fact, I think I have it on a magazine in my closet. But a completely cleaned up and refurbished, shiny looking and brand new C-3PO and R2-D2 at the end of A New Hope. I remember that image incredibly well. I mean, as a kid, that's what I gravitated towards. But as we get older, the other parts of the story end up taking on a lot more importance. So it's constantly fascinating to me what people sort of zero in on as things that are distinctly Star Wars for them and what's important. Like all the talk about R2-D2 missing. I mean, there were many of you who reached out to me on this show going, where's R2-D2 and all the promotional work? And that was incredibly important for many of you. And again, it's just all based off of, it's all subjective, based off of what's important to you. And for me, I wasn't all that worried about R2-D2. But my feeling towards these films all along has been that, I continue to look forward. We had our time with the original trilogy characters. We had our time with other characters in the prequels. I was, and continue to be, and always have been, very much in the mindset that moving forward in the sequel trilogy, I'm glad that we have those original trilogy characters there that are part of the story. They should be, but at the same time, this is about the new characters. So I suppose I've completely adopted what Disney, Lucasfilm, J.J. Abrams, and Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy all wanted to do, and looking forward and not to the past. Speaking of the past, Deadline has an article with Bob Iger, who continues to be promoting his book, and he did have some comments to say about Star Wars and what has happened with the movies under his watch. And this is a quote from him, with my fingers. I have said publicly that I think we made and released too many Star Wars films over a short period of time. I have not said that they were disappointing in any way. I have not said that I'm disappointed in their performance. I just think that there's something so special about a Star Wars film, and less is more. And I took this from a Cinema Blend article. That's where I pulled this particular quote from. It was in Deadline, but Cinema Blend also covered the story, and that's where I grabbed this particular quote from. That's the version that I grabbed it from. I don't agree with Bob Iger. I'm somebody that could easily have 1 or 2 Star Wars movies a year, right? Probably wouldn't be the best for the fandom, but I don't agree with Bob Iger on this. I don't think that they released too many Star Wars films in a short period of time. Personally, I think the problem was there wasn't enough connective tissue and a through line for those films. It could be something that is simply a matter of the Marvel effect, right? I'm kind of, maybe. But when you look at the saga films, those continued to do well, and The Rise of Skywalker is certainly going to do very well. But it's going to do well because it's the continuation of a story. I think Rogue One did well because Rogue One, everybody knew, for the most part, that this was taking place right before A New Hope. And so there is some direct connectivity. And as a matter of fact, I thought it was really smart for the information to get out, whether this was intentional or not. I thought it was really smart that they put out that A New Hope ends like 10 minutes before, I'm sorry, Rogue One ends about 10 minutes before A New Hope starts. I thought that was a brilliant move on Disney and Lucasfilm's part, because that gets the audience going, oh, I want to go see what's going to happen in the lead up right to the movie that started all of it. And really, what am I talking about? Well, I'm zeroing back in on Solo. Solo didn't have any of that. I love Solo, right? It was this weekend's watching as I continue my chronological watching of all of the films leading up to the rise of Skywalker. But, you know, Solo didn't have anything from the other films to really pull from, apart from it being about the character Han Solo. But even then, even though I loved it and I thought Alden Ehrenreich did a fantastic job, even then you didn't even have the same actor. And I think that's where the mistake was made. I think if Solo, and again, I'm speaking hypothetically, obviously, timeline-wise, this doesn't fit, but if Solo had direct connectivity to The Last Jedi or A New Hope in some way, shape, or form, even if it was a prequel, then I think you're looking at a much different situation, and people wanting to go out and see Solo in the wake of The Last Jedi or pending the next Star Wars saga film, but it didn't have any of that. So I disagree with Iger that they put out too many movies. I just think that the selection and lack of the connection between the films didn't do Solo any good and could have potentially hurt it. Said it before, I'll say it again. I personally wished that, and perhaps we'll find out the reason why this is the case, but I wish that had been Snoke in Solo that popped up at the end and not Darth Maul. I thought that would have been for me personally, a better choice. Even Jabba, even though I know the plan was potentially that if there was another Solo movie, that would have been the story of what went wrong with that deal and with that operation, that mission that Han Solo and Chewbacca go on with Jabba the Hutt. Be that as it may, I think if you had added some connectivity in there, or even went so far as something to the effect of, Kira is Rey's mom, which I know is a theory that's been out there for a while. I don't personally believe it. It's interesting, but I love me some Emilia Clarke, don't get me wrong. But even if you had something like that, I think it would have been a much different story. But people going into Solo is just like a random origin story for Han Solo played by a different actor, and I think that it was already working from a place of disadvantage. All right, let's move on to some Rian Johnson stuff. So, talked about it in the bonus podcast. I'll mention it again here in just a moment. But Benioff and Weiss no longer doing Star Wars in the wake of their Netflix deal, and again, I'll provide some further commentary on that. So that raises the question in a lot of people's minds of, okay, well, what does this mean for Rian Johnson? What does this mean for his potential Star Wars trilogy, and what's going to happen? Is that still going on? And there's been a lot of pontificating and videos and whatnot throughout the week talking about that, and I've watched entirely too many of them. Anyways, to Deadline, Rian Johnson had this to say, talking specifically first about Knives Out and the inspiration for Knives Out, and then talking about future of Star Wars. Now, he said this: anyone who's on Twitter these days, God bless you, because it's rough waters out there. But there's also wonderful stuff about it. Now, Johnson said this Saturday at Deadline's The Contenders Los Angeles. Okay. That's why we're all still on it, I guess. That's one of the things Knives Out engages with, the current state of online culture. Whether you made a Star Wars movie or you have a cooking show, whatever you're doing on there, someone's going to be screaming at you about it probably. Let's put it on screen in a way we can all maybe have a laugh about it. And apparently there's one particular character, and I don't know who plays this particular, I have a guess, but I don't know who plays this particular character. There's one particular character who tweets out a bunch of alt-right stuff on Twitter. And I know that there's a lot of people that have seen Knives Out and loved it, but I also know that there are those on the right who have complained about Knives Out, talking about its wokeness or whatever. Look, I don't care. I'll judge it on its merits when I see it. There's no escaping any of that, regardless of your political affiliation in films. If somebody's going to inject some type of political message, it's bound to go and frustrate somebody. But here's a really slight example, and I know this isn't Star Wars, but just hang with me here for a moment. Over the weekend, I saw Terminator Dark Fate, and I loved it. I mentioned in a blast that a sure sign for me that a movie, it has potential to be good, and then when I'm watching it, I know that I'm enjoying it. A sure sign is one, usually within the first 5 or 10 minutes of the opening of a film, you can kind of get a gauge as to the vibe of the movie that kind of sets the stage. And my track record on films that didn't turn out to be very good based off of my 5 to 10 minute assessment is pretty spot on. The first 5 to 10 minutes of Terminator Dark Fate were fantastic and had some really wow moments that I was not expecting. I also didn't want the movie to end. Really did enjoy it. But just truth be told, my least favorite Terminator movie is Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. I actually like Salvation and Genesis for what they're worth. That being said, there was some, for lack of a better term, wokeness, right, in the movie. There's some very specific things done in the film that people are interpreting as an injecting of agendas or where we are in movies right now. I'll be completely honest with you watching it, and I work full-time doing news talk radio, so, you know, I'm kind of hypersensitive to this stuff. It didn't bother me at all in the movie. Watching it, I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing. That's cool. I didn't think it diminished the movie at all. I didn't think it took away any of the gravity of the film at all. That's what I'm really hoping when it comes to Knives Out and Rian Johnson, even if he did go and inject some progressive themes, if you will. I don't care. I want to see it for what it is. It doesn't matter to me. Speaking of which, so Knives Out, already getting fantastic reviews, right, on Rotten Tomatoes. Comes out in a few weeks, so we'll see what the public at large thinks. I personally believe this bodes well for Rian Johnson's future when it comes to doing more Star Wars movies. So he went on to say this. Johnson added he is still in talks with Lucasfilm to make more Star Wars films, though he had no news about them. We're still engaged with Lucasfilm, and we'll wait and see, Johnson said. No updates on this at the moment, but yeah. Okay, so that concludes sort of the gist of the news portion of the show this week. So let me get into to just a little bit of that and my thoughts on what the future is going to hold here. As I mentioned on the bonus podcast earlier this week, I'm fine that Benioff and Weiss aren't doing Star Wars. Not because I didn't look forward to Benioff and Weiss doing Star Wars, but because if people are going to create content in a world that I love, I want them to be 100% in it, right? And if these guys are going to have their time divided up and it seemed like whatever they were going to do was already dwindling in size, I'll never forget both times this happened, right? Star Wars has this amazing ability to really do memory burn when things are announced. And oddly enough, I was kind of in the same place in the room that I'm in right now when both of these things happened. I remember when the video from the Star Wars show dropped with Andy Gutierrez announcing that Benioff and Weiss were doing a series of movies. And I remember also, right before The Last Jedi came out, that when it was announced that Rian Johnson was going to do his own trilogy, and they were very close together. When it came to Benioff and Weiss, that slowly began to shrink and get smaller and smaller. It was a series of movies, and then it was, well, maybe they're doing a trilogy, and then it was, well, they're doing this Netflix deal, and then it was this singular movie. Maybe they're just going to write it and produce it, and then they're off altogether. Okay, that's fine. It gets me excited because we'll get the announcement of whoever's going to take over for the next slate of films. And hopefully it's somebody that can devote 100% of their time to creating fantastic Star Wars content. Now, in the Hollywood Reporter piece talking about Benioff and Weiss, they apparently were supposed to be working on a story that was the origins of the Jedi, like the first Jedi. Now, whether or not this also means sort of Old Republic, the Sith Wars. That sounds like it's even before that. If Disney goes that route, if Lucasfilm goes that route, I hope we hang in that timeline. I think that would be amazing. as I mentioned on last week's show, that's the struggle that Disney has. They have to create a brand new mythology that we're going to all follow. To what Bob Iger said, which I talked about earlier in the show, he does have a point. Star Wars is special, and maybe there needs to be a little bit distance. I don't think 3 years, but I think a movie a year could absolutely work if they're doing some sort of saga that's got a through line. And it makes all the sense in the world to me to go back several thousand years if necessary and start off with this was the first Jedi, this was the beginning of the Sith. You can bring in elements that we're all used to from the saga films, but you can do it in this new timeline and we can discover the origins of it. I think that Rian Johnson would be spectacular in crafting that. When Rian Johnson was handed a Star Wars movie, I said from the get-go that Disney, and specifically Lucasfilm, they need sort of a new George Lucas. I think people like Dave Filoni, who worked directly with George, are doing a fantastic job of that. But right now, it feels like we have sort of numerous people that are filling different parts of George Lucas's role, as opposed to just having Lucas handle everything and everything spins off from George Lucas. You have individuals that have good lore, and then you have good directors, and that's kind of what Lucas did originally, right? A New Hope was a bit of an anomaly. I mean, that was catching lightning in a bottle, but he ended up collaborating with other individuals to create all of these amazing films. He didn't do them in the prequels, and arguably for a lot of people, that was to the detriment of the prequels. But I've always been of the opinion that there needs to be somebody at the core that's going to really be deep within the mythology part of it to really get into it. And I think that that's the kind of person that Rian Johnson is. His tastes really, to me, zero in on that type of death because he's kind of a quirky dude. And where J.J. Abrams is more, I don't want to say bombastic, but J.J. Abrams is kind of more mainstream. I think Rian Johnson is just teetering under mainstream and almost, he's got a bit of that sort of indie feel to it still, which is kind of where George Lucas started from. So if you have somebody crafting the mythology and then you have individuals on top of that, maybe you start off with Rian Johnson doing the first Jedi origin story and then hand off the reins to other individuals, but he's in charge of crafting all of it. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not we get an announcement of that sometime soon. I think it would be wise for Disney and Lucasfilm. I was listening to, I think it was one of the Collider shows. I don't remember who said it, but somebody had made a comment that, it would be really good for Disney and Lucasfilm to make some kind of announcement shortly after The Rise of Skywalker drops, and assuming it's successful, sort of speaking to this idea that, hey, this is what we're doing next. You guys love this, and guess where we're going? So I don't know if that's going to be the case. I don't know if Rian Johnson gets pushed up in the line. A lot of people are talking about the controversy surrounding Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi. I hope that Disney looks the other way with that, because I've heard consistently, even from the most ardent hashtag fandom menace type people, that they like Rian Johnson as a director. They just didn't like what he did in The Last Jedi with Luke. And they go on to say that if he's given the reins of his own movie and story that he's crafting, that they would be open to that. So I hope Disney and Lucasfilm recognizes that particular part of the fandom, that really it's just about The Last Jedi and less about Rian Johnson. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people. All right, one more quick thing before we move on to a few items with regard to The Rise of Skywalker, and that's this. This popped up on Twitter during the week. And at first I thought that it was just I thought that this was nothing more than just coincidence, but then Rian Johnson actually commented on it. So the shot in Return of the Jedi, it's a close-up on Luke Skywalker's face, and it's the shot where he finally comes to that conclusion that what he's doing is wrong. He has that, probably my favorite moment in Return of the Jedi, when he's just wailing. He's wailing on Vader's, just hammering, right, and finally chops off Vader's arm. And then there's that moment when you get this sort of little bit of an upshot of Luke's, grieved face, and he's realizing that, he's become like his dad, and he looks at his own hand. That shot is mirrored in that moment when Luke has the same realization when he confronts Ben Solo in his sleep in The Last Jedi, and somebody had composited those two shots on top of each other in a GIF file and noticed that they were framed exactly the same way. And I thought for sure that this was going to be nothing more than just a coincidence, and it turns out that it wasn't. It turns out that Rian Johnson actually crafted that shot specifically that way, and he actually commented about that exact thing on Twitter. And can I just tell you, I just smiled so wide at seeing that, because that's just cool to me. That's respectful and just neat. And again, I'll use it as a shameless promotion of my EMBARK books. Little things like that are fun. I've got little tidbits in the third story that I'm writing in the opening trilogy, which I'm almost finished with. I'm down to the final act of the book, and I'm really getting excited like I have for the first two other books. But there's little things that I put in the book that all relate to the other books, and it's just really cool. And not only that, I inject little things that reference other films that most people won't even get. The first two books are filled with all kinds of Easter eggs, and I know a lot of people have picked up on them. Things that don't relate to the story but are more pop culture items, or particular pieces of dialogue that I squeezed in from some favorite movies that I have that happen to fit within my book. To the people that get it, I hope that they're excited about it. I hope that they see that and go, I wonder if Jon did that intentionally. That's one of those moments that I think is just so rad that Rian Johnson did that. His love of the franchise, his love of Star Wars as a kid just shows through in every single frame of that movie. And again, I know all the controversy surrounding it. I know how much everybody gets so annoyed at that film, but I personally think it's an absolute masterpiece.
Something inside me has always been there, but now it's awake, and I need help.
So, rewatching the films, as I have been over the past few weeks, and this weekend was Solo, so such a fun movie. So this is going to be less about Solo. It's interesting going from Revenge of the Sith to Solo, though. That is fun and different. And to the point that I was making earlier in the show, it would have been interesting to see if Solo had actually, dropped after Revenge of the Sith did. If that was the first movie to come out before the sequel trilogy did, I wonder if it would do any different. Anyway, but more specifically, going back and watching the prequels over again, and seeing that love relationship in the prequels develop, and how important that storyline was to that trilogy. And I guess I never really thought about it that way. When I think about the prequels, apart from just enjoying them and how much fun they are, in particular sequences that I like in all three of the films, Bombast Jedi podcast did a really great podcast this week where they brought on some guests and they talked at length about The Phantom Menace. And it's interesting just to see how many people have become such fans of that film that didn't like it when it was first released. But watching the trilogy over 3 weeks, I really sort of picked up on that importance of the Amidala relationship, of the Anakin Padme relationship. And it's not like I didn't know it was already there, but just in the wake of the sequel trilogy and Rey and Ben and what we know so far of where we're heading in the Rise of Skywalker, it really sort of pushed that relationship in the prequel trilogy up to the surface and brought a newfound level of appreciation in my mind, and really brought a newfound level to the sequel trilogy as well. And I am really excited thinking about when these films are done. And I talked about it this week, but just again, when these films are done, looking at the sequel trilogy and Reylo and versus Amidala, Anakin and Padme, and how they really are going to be fascinating bookends to that original trilogy that is so beloved. and especially where we're going to be heading in The Rise of Skywalker. Somebody had posted up a series of different marketing items from The Rise of Skywalker. I think there was a Funko Pop in there. There was some cartoon. There was maybe like a comic or a kid's book. And there was all this use of destiny, 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 destiny. And it was all attached and surrounding Kylo Ren. There's a fantastic individual on Twitter. As a matter of fact, I think they tweeted just while in the middle of when I was doing this. Yes, let me see if I can get their exact title. Kira, Bad Romance Selector TROS on Twitter. I mentioned them last week. They've been putting up some really fun polls all week long. But they're big shippers of Reylo. And they've been making just some really interesting commentary surrounding Reylo and Ben Solo and how you normally treat villains versus, how you treat core characters, and how the Kylo Ren character has not been treated like a villain in this movie. He's been treated with an arc, and you don't do that. You don't do that with a villain. And for some reason, and I don't know if this is going to play out in The Rise of Skywalker, and I've read the leaks, and the leaks kind of point to some of this, but I'm not going to get into that. But what I wanted to say was this idea of destiny and the potential that perhaps Palpatine's return in The Rise of Skywalker and his inevitable downfall can only happen. And I know that I'm not speaking anything new. I'm just saying it for the sake of the show this week. But perhaps the only reason that Palpatine can actually finally be taken down is that combination of Reylo. It is that light and dark side that rose up. It's only the two of them together that can defeat this ultimate evil. A lot of people have pointed to, and I wouldn't mind this so much, a return of Anakin Skywalker as a Force ghost, and even something in the final act of the film that helps him go and defeat the Emperor. And if that indeed is the case, that's fine too, right? I can see how that would totally work. But wouldn't it be interesting if we do have the Force ghosts return, but more on a motivational level? I remember watching the original trilogy as a kid and how moved I was at the fact that Ben couldn't help Luke, right? If you choose to face Vader alone, right, I cannot interfere. Qui-Gon Jinn, right? We can't fight a war for you. And of course, that was the Jedi's downfall. To me, it would be amazing to see the return of these Force ghosts, but not in a direct way of fighting Palpatine, but more of a, we can't help you. Only you guys can do this. And that speaks to exactly what Luke says in the trailers, right? 1,000 generations, live in you now. But this is your fight. And I envision a scenario, potentially, and again, this is not headcanon, this is just my sort of, wouldn't this be amazing? But I envision this situation where Rey doesn't think that she can bring Palpatine down alone. And here is Kylo Ren, but it's Ben Solo who is here to assist her and finally bring an end to all of this. I think that could be powerful. I think it could be meaningful and such a great addition to the overall saga. And the last thing that I want to say before we move on to a little bit of Mandalorian stuff and listener feedback this week, I was watching the trailer the other day, and this is a really fun thing to do. Right? Watch the special D23 look that has all the clips from the previous films. Then watch the teaser trailer, and then watch the full trailer, and do it all in order. It's a really fun kind of 8, 9, that might even be 10 minutes, say 8 or 9 minutes. It really is a fun sort of back-to-back 8 or 9 minutes, especially if you set that up in your YouTube and just let it play. But that line in the full trailer, and let me go ahead. I have an edit of the trailer. I'm going to go ahead and play that for you here now. But the line that Palpatine says in the second half of the trailer is so so important and meaningful, in my opinion. So this is about 1:47, and again, I'm going to go ahead and just I made an edit of the trailer that I used in the intro last week. So this is an edit of the final trailer, and it contains that piece of dialogue that I want to spend just a little bit more time with.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now, you're coming together. Is your undoing. Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny.
The Force will be with you.
Always.
By the way, I thought it was a bold move. And some people have talked about this in listener feedback, which we'll get to in just a second. But I thought it was a bold move to end with just that close-up shot of Rey's face and her holding the lightsaber. And I think most people have come to this conclusion. I'm venturing a guess that's going to be a really, really, really important part of the film. But the line of Palpatine in there, and now you're coming together, will be your undoing. But it doesn't even say it that evil. Like, and that could be read differently. You know, that could be a different take that they use. But that line, to me, really does zero in at the heart of this film. It really does sort of nail what's happening here. Palpatine needs Ben Solo to be redeemed and for him to come together with Rey in order to achieve whatever it is he's trying to achieve. But in the end, it's actually going to end up being his undoing. And that's the way I really do think that Reylo is going to go down. I'm not going to get into right now my belief on what actually happens with Ben. I'm convinced he does get redeemed. But in terms of how that ends up happening and what ends up happening to him after that, I'm going to let the movie sort of play out before I come to any sort of firm conclusion on what's best for the movie or what's not. I know what I would like. I know what a lot of you guys would like in terms of what happens with Ben Solo at the end of The Rise of Skywalker, but I'm also going to keep a very open mind and trust the writers and Chris Terrio and J.J. Abrams and those who signed off on whatever their decision was. I'm going to trust them to have gone and done the right thing. All right, one more quick thing, and then we'll get to listener feedback this week. And I just want to mention The Mandalorian. I know there's a lot of people out there, and rightfully so, really excited about The Mandalorian. And there's a lot of people out there saying they're actually more excited for The Mandalorian than they are The Rise of Skywalker. Then you have individuals like my buddy Zach over at the Knights of Vader, who's kind of indifferent to The Mandalorian. I was somewhat indifferent to The Mandalorian. Obviously looking forward to it. I'll be watching it on day one. But my heart, right? My head may be on Mandalorian, but my heart belongs to The Rise of Skywalker. I'm really excited for this thing now, man. I know that, we were supposed to get some interesting reveals. I think there's going to be a lot of connective tissue in it. And after that trailer again that they put out earlier this week that I did the bonus podcast and YouTube video on, I'm really excited for this show. And the fact that we're getting all this amazing Star Wars content even before we get to The Rise of Skywalker. That's going to be a lot of fun. We're less than 2 weeks away from the debut of The Mandalorian, and we're going to get 2 episodes that first week. The first one will land on, what is that? On that Tuesday. I'm looking at it right now on my calendar. And then we'll get another episode on the 15th, which is fantastic. And it's a lot of fun, too, because that weekend is actually my A New Hope watching weekend. So that'll be a nice sort of juxtaposition into watching the one that started it all again. But the fact that we're going to have Mandalorian content to talk about all the way up until the release of The Rise of Skywalker. On top of that, I imagine that those TV spots and that new footage will be dropping very soon for The Rise of Skywalker as well. So trust me, there'll be no lack of any Star Wars content between now and the release of The Rise of Skywalker, and my nerd world will be here for it every single step of the way. So be sure you're liking and subscribing to the YouTube page or the podcast, depending on what version of the show that you're locked into, and TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, and leave a comment on YouTube as well. I'll be doing a lot of audio blasts on the Blaster app between now and The Rise of Skywalker. So if you haven't downloaded that either, go to the App Store and search for Blaster app, all one word, or you can go to theblasterapp.com and download it for your iPhone. Only for the iPhone right now. They don't have it yet available for the Android. It is currently in development from what I'm told. But we got so much content. I'm really excited. Oh, and then one last thing. Resistance. Star Wars Resistance has been a lot of fun this season. The show's skews a little bit younger for my taste, but now that the Colossus is out in space and we've sort of bumped up into the timeline of the sequel trilogy even closer, I've really been enjoying the current episodes. They've been a lot of fun. This last episode was a bit of a filler where they need to get food, so they have to go and get this flying creature off of this snow planet. There's a lot of really good action set pieces in it, though, and I really enjoyed this week's episode quite a bit. All right, you can always email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment on YouTube. Many of you have, and we need to get to all your listener feedback this week.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, the first comment comes from V, and they say this. Personally, I was excited for The Last Jedi in a hype way. I was excited about seeing where the story would go and whether the Reylo theory would be a mistake or not. My excitement for The Rise of Skywalker is covered with worry and sadness, to be honest, because it's going to be the final film, and whatever happens, that's it. Plus, it's that I'm not ready to let Star Wars go. Well, okay. There'll still be plenty of Star Wars and plenty to talk about with this movie. I'll reiterate where I'm coming from, and everybody's obviously entitled to their opinion, as is V, and I really appreciate you writing in. Much in the same way, going back and watching those, as I talked about last week, going back and watching the old trailers, it is really interesting to see the Last Jedi trailer and the final trailer, and then to watch the final trailer for The Rise of Skywalker, and the vibes that I remember from that time, and then the vibes that I get from The Rise of Skywalker. And I'll say what I said last week. And I agree with V. I was hyped for The Last Jedi, wondering where it was going to go. Visually, it looked like a lot of fun, looked great, was very compelling. The Rise of Skywalker, I'm excited for in a completely different way. On a lot of different levels. Not just the storyline, but like I keep saying, every single one of the shots in that film, I'm desperate to go see how they play out. The film just looks stunning to me. And if those are just a few of the iconic shots in the movie, J.J. Abrams, as I often say, in my opinion, creates infinitely rewatchable films. I already am convinced that The Rise of Skywalker is going to be an infinitely rewatchable Star Wars movie. If not, for me personally, and I know this is a big leap, it's going to end up being like, you know what? I need some Star Wars fix. I'm going to The Rise of Skywalker because it's probably got a little bit of everything that I want from a Star Wars movie in it. All right, friend of the show, Dylan, says this. With respect to the trailer, this movie is going to be a visual and narrative masterpiece, writes friend of the show, Dylan. It was a long wait for the trailer, but worth every bit of it. Now I don't know how I'm going to make it to 12/20. Well, like I said, we got plenty of Star Wars content between now and then. Secondly, similar to you, I'm in the process of watching every Star Wars movie before the release of The Rise of Skywalker, and just watched Revenge of the Sith a few nights ago. It was absolutely the most enjoyable viewing of that movie I've ever experienced. I was engrossed in the entire film and moved by the ending more than I've ever been. My eyes were glued to the screen every time Palpatine was on the screen. The knowledge we now have about Palpatine and the Rise of Skywalker provides an entirely new perspective. Now more than ever, I would argue that Revenge of the Sith is a masterpiece of cinema. Can't wait to watch Solo this weekend. Have a great weekend. For a Reason, Dylan. Thank you for the shout-out. For a Reason, for those that don't know, is from EMBARK. You should go and read them. They're available right now on Amazon.com in ebook, paperback, and audiobook, narrated by me, 1 and 2. You should go and get them. Search for Jon Justice, EMBARK. Yeah, man, and thanks for sharing, Dylan. Yeah, it's so much fun to go back and watch these films, especially when you're hyped for new Star Wars movies. And I'll continue to push my PSA. Put everything else away. Put your cell phone someplace else. Don't have a laptop with you. Just watch the film like you were in a movie theater. Just tell yourself, I'm in a movie theater. You can pause if you need to go use the restroom, but tell yourself you're in a movie theater and watch it like you would any other movie. It is such a great experience. Joe B writes this. I say Boba Fett will be the Mandalorian's mentor. Interesting. Okay. This is, of course, going back to the first episode of The Mandalorian. Apparently has some spoiler in it and speculation about who the Mandalorian actually is and whether or not they're Boba Fett. All right. Monica writes this. Holy guacamole, John. Great seeing you. I've been listening to your podcast for months now, and it is genuinely exciting and even more engaging to watch you talk and seeing the excitement. When I heard the news about D&D today, I instantly thought that somewhat this was not their decision. My conspiracy theory would be that Disney will never admit it, but that Uncle Iger surely must have taken the TLJ backlash into consideration, and he just would not take any more chances. I'm certain that there would have been endless comparisons between the new trilogy and Game of Thrones, and the public in general would be disobedient towards it. If both 9 and Mandalorian will be a success, which they will be, Disney will be back on track with the public love for Star Wars, and let's hope it all goes this way, because I would personally like to finally stop navigating through the negativity in the comments and on some other certain channels, just share the love for this wonderful world. I think that Monica, thank you so much for the comment, is right on a lot of different levels, and let me add this. Solo's performance and the controversy around The Last Jedi is ultimately going to be a positive for Lucasfilm and ultimately a positive for Disney. And the reason it's going to be is because you can't grow without going through some hardship and some difficulties. And Solo took a risk, and Disney is assessing that risk and trying not to make the same mistake. And Last Jedi really went out there and was bold in a lot of its decision-making, which ticked off a lot of people, but adhered a lot of people to that movie, right? And in my view, good art is divisive. Not always, but often good art is divisive. And so, moving forward, I ultimately think that divisiveness is going to be good for the films moving forward and the fandom. Because eventually it's going to happen. Eventually, that's you're gonna, I mean, if it wasn't The Last Jedi, it would have been something. If it wasn't Solo, it would have been something. So I'm happy that whatever sort of turbulent waters, with the Death Star floating in it, that Disney needed to navigate, I'd rather have it done now. I'd rather have it be in the middle of the sequel trilogy than the end of the sequel trilogy, right? And the same thing for Solo. I'd rather have it happen early on in the new content creation under Disney than way down the road. That way Disney can learn from our mistakes, right? Because what did Yoda say in The Last Jedi, right? Right? Powerful, right? Mistakes are, right? Those are difficult things. A lesson that Luke had to learn. All right, Echo Kill-11 Gaming wrote this. Hey, I like that you had a video today and not just audio. Question, what planet or planets would you like to see from The Rise of Skywalker put into Battlefront 2? I'd like to see all the new planets from the upcoming film put into the game, but which would you like to see? Great video today, John. I don't know. I'd love to see some more of the classic films back in. I was bummed, and I won't wipe out on gaming, but I really enjoyed Battlefront 2. And I enjoyed Battlefront 1, and I was glad in Battlefront 2 that we focused sort of on space battles and not sort of in atmosphere battles. But now I find myself missing that. I really liked doing the Hoth battle. I liked doing the battle on Jakku. So any new planets they could add into the mix, I'm fine with. I wish that we had the option of going space to ground and space to ground. I think that would be rad to be able to go from one to another within the video gaming. I'm a fighter assault, starfighter assault, starfighter squadron. I'm a nut for that. I can play blow up ships for hours upon hours on end. So I don't have a ton of preference. I will say I don't really need a jungle planet. It would be rad if Kef Burr is apparently the planet where the Death Star remains are. That would be cool to fly around. And one more quick point. This was so disappointing to me because it was so difficult to go and play it. But in the first Battlefront, when they added the ability to fight around the Death Star, that was the stuff of fanboy dreams to me. That was incredible. But I was so bummed out because it randomly chooses that you couldn't just automatically go to there. And I know you can do the arcade mode, but it just isn't the same as battling with other people. Man, I was bummed out. I wish some of those locations they had in Battlefront 1 for Starfighter they would put into Battlefront 2, because the stuff around Cloud City was great. The Death Star battle was just incredible. Being able to fly around it, like when we watched it in A New Hope, was amazing. So yeah, that's what I want. All right, Courtney says this. In regards to this week's show, I've been debating what Kylo was doing after he and Rey destroy what presumably is Vader's charred helmet. I thought he might be reaching for it, but when I played it back on YouTube at a slower speed, the helmet looks like it's nearly on the ground when the scene starts to fade out. When Kylo starts to reach out, the helmet is still falling. I would think he's strong enough with the Force to catch it immediately. We'll see. He could potentially catch it with the Force at the last second, but he also looks like he might be reaching for his helmet. Just thought it was an interesting tidbit. However, all it does is confirm that I have no idea what's going on in this scene, and man, am I excited. I think that shot, whatever battle that Rey and Kylo are having, and he's got the helmet on, I think that's the last we see of the helmet. For some reason, I think whatever the resolution is to that particular fight, he loses the helmet and doesn't wear it anymore when all is said and done after that. I really sense that the helmet, because that thing's just perplexing me about what its whole storyline is going to be in this film. But I think the helmet is going to be very representative of the arc of Kylo Ren in the movie. Reforged probably early on in the film, donning it earlier in the film, but as he slowly creeps towards the light, the helmet is going to go back away again. And I like that idea because while it is kind of a rehash of The Last Jedi, it's for different reasons. Because in my opinion, look, he only took the helmet off because Snoke told him to and was being rude to him. Was being rude to Kylo. Take that ridiculous thing off. You're just a child in a mask. And Kylo Ren was ticked, right? So he destroys it out of anger, not because he really wanted to, but because he was ticked off at Snoke. I like the idea that he puts it back on because he hasn't really gotten over it yet, and that taking it off a final time is representative of the actual turn. Right? Okay. Let's see. Friend of the show, Severin, says this. Kind of random, but this week I've been revisiting the Kylo Ren Spotify playlist put together by the official Star Wars peeps way back when TFA came out, and there's one song by Breaking Benjamin that is heartbreakingly Reylo and is also Bendemption-y. And this was put together as far back as The Force Awakens, so I don't think they were just messing around with this one. It's called Ashes of Eden. They included the lyrics in here. Super angsty and beautiful and interesting because it's really the only piece of music on there that isn't screamo rock / punk rock monster vocals. It is a great song, by the way. I like me some Breaking Benjamin. It's a sweet ray of hope amidst an otherwise dark and driving, raging sea of conflict and anger. Yeah, I don't put a lot of stock, and thanks for the message here. They said the part where he sings, will the light begin to pull me to its everlasting will, I pretty much lost it, wrote Severin. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think those themes have always been there. They're not going to be putting out, in my opinion, spoilers about the film on a Spotify playlist. That being said, it does serve as an example of those themes of Destiny and Reylo and Bendemption. that were planted so early on in The Force Awakens. I'll keep saying it. If it's not Reylo, then what is it? If Kylo Ren and Rey aren't dual protagonists in this film, and that doesn't reach a conclusion, which we already know it's going to because Daisy Ridley said so, then what is this story actually all about? All right, let's see. Roxalina Jen writes this. Not since the original movie have I been so excited about Star Wars. Space battles and laser sword fights aside, the true heart of a good story is the interaction and connection between characters that stir our emotions and makes us root for them. After TLJ, I've moved beyond the casual fan and avidly wait for every delicious tidbit of info and shamelessly indulge in speculation and imagination. Thank you for being a part of that. Thank you, Roxalina, for the kind words. I really do appreciate it and being part of the show. Diskeezy Pro. Wow, you're the first one I've heard say anything about Kylo stopping the Vader helmet from falling. That gives me a whole new perspective on that scene in the film. It just feels like this is all something that's been brewing as if by design. I'll finish what you started. Darkness rises and the light to meet it. This just sets up for Kylo to take down Palpatine with the assistance from, wait for it, Jar Jar. Misa back. Just kidding. Anakin, great show again. Thank you, Diskeezy. I appreciate it. Friend of the show, Miranda, writes this. This is fitting for Ben Solo, The Road to Redemption, written by Brandon Amberger. It's a daunting path, but it's an uphill battle. That is as slippery and steep it goes against the current in the frigid, rough rapids with rays of blistering sun, a jagged wall of obsidian, and a sea of sand. There are no shortcuts, only cuts, scrapes, and bruises. What you did in the past will never be forgotten, but what you are remembered for will have changed. Miranda goes on to say, you know what's most interesting and intriguing about the trailer I haven't mentioned till now is how the music starts out so dramatically suspenseful, but then after the bit with C-3PO, we go right into the main theme, and it's epic and triumphant as it's ever has sounded, and it's reminiscent to the theme of the Avengers Endgame final trailer and the last Harry Potter trailer ever. The musical themes in those trailers have an epic pace because they want to have the audience in the know, and this movie is the final installment. Will guarantee one big epic finale and a love letter to the entire world as a saga. But anyways, I just love how the music in the trailers give you that feeling of what's ahead and that it's going to be one exciting experience. I love the final trailer for the reasons that Miranda said. That moment, what are you doing there, 3PO? That Poe Dameron does, just sort of the stop down after that amazing line that I mentioned earlier from Palpatine, and then just crescendos up, and I'll probably use that totally wrong. I don't care, but it just starts to just soar, right? That, two things real quick. The shot of Rey on that floating barge thing is just incredible. Right on top of that. Is the Palpatine line, right? But that shot of them on the Orbax and the Star Destroyer, I just get out of town, man. I cannot wait to see that. All right, friend of the show, Misconduct One says this. I actually thought Ben Solo, Kylo Ren walking out of the wavy ocean mist was a big whoa moment in the trailer. Along with the two smashing the shrine of Vader. We still don't know what's going on with the cracked up mask. He's still sporting, not sporting. One last thing regarding this trailer and this new movie after 40 years of waiting. Never mind my wildest dreams did I ever imagine when I was a 15-year-old girl in 1990. Great year, by the way. 1991, great year. It's been revolving around my life as of late. I don't know why. Sitting around with my brother and all of his friends arguing about how they should have made Leia a Jedi in Return of the Jedi. Did I ever think almost 30 years later I'd be listening to a podcast on a phone getting ready to see episode 9 of the Skywalker saga? We never dreamed we would ever see another Star Wars trilogy, let alone 2 trilogies. By the way, I got shut down by my brother during that argument when he said, well, it isn't ever going to happen because the movies are done and we aren't getting any more. She's just a princess in a galaxy far, far away, and that's all she's ever going to be because they didn't make her a Jedi, so kick rocks and accept it. But she's always my hero, no matter what anybody ever said. You're so awesome, John. Thank you for all your positive thoughts. Oh, thank you. It's so much fun sharing Star Wars with you and all the great people on here in your comment section. May the Force be with you always. By the way, so I don't want to focus much on this because there's two different versions. So for those that don't know, if you're listening to the podcast version now, there is a video version. Okay, it's exactly the same content. I'm just I'm recording the show for YouTube in the middle of when I'm recording it for the regular podcast. So for those that are watching on YouTube that have only listened to the podcast until now, this is how I always do the show. Like, nothing's changed. Like, so if you're watching going, oh, look, he's doing interesting hand signals and talking with his hands. No, don't misunderstand. If there was a secret camera in the corner filming me for all these hundreds of episodes that I've done since 2015, there would be very little difference than what you see now. Because okay, moving on. Let's see here. B writes this. I'm only going to make one comment, though I could probably make 100 or so, maybe for later. Though we'll mention on Girls with Saber, they mentioned you and said they love you while talking about it last week. Suddenly, wait, they said, where's Hux? Okay. Let me stop here real quick before I get into Hux. First out, shout out to my girls over at Girls with Sabers and to a bunch of you guys. So I popped on the chat on a recent Girls with Saber episode. So the story goes like this. I was getting ready to get into bed. Well, actually, I gotten into bed, right? And usually I watch a little bit on the iPad before, something before I get into bed. And I was in a Star Wars-y mood. Shock. And I saw that Girls with Sabers had gone live. I'm like, sweet, this is going to totally fill the bill. So I brought it up, and I popped into the chat room, and I was shocked at how many of you that listen to this show and write to me all the time, thank you, were on with Girls with Sabers, and they were so sweet. They were so sweet in pointing out that I was in the chat room, and I was so tickled. That was so much fun. So thank you guys. You're the best. For those that haven't listened to Girls with Sabers, you need to check it out. It's a fantastic podcast. It along with Knights of Vader, both are two of my favorites. All right. So B goes on to say, when I was a kid, I went Saturday afternoon movies, and I did see Star Wars for the first time when I was a young adult and loved it ever since, as have friends of mine. Before the movie, there would be a serial. Last maybe 15 minutes or so, when they would end with something happening to our hero that looked like doom. One had a car going off the cliff, another was someone caught in a burning building, etc. So next week would start with how they got out. They were cliffhangers, right? Why would Star Wars repeat what happened to Vader? Han, Luke, and Rey care so much to try and save Ben Solo. All of it for naught. As Luke said, see you around, kid. Gonna be a wild couple of months. Keep up the great work, B. Thank you, B. All right, Barmag writes this. To be honest, those leaks are weird. Probably true, but maybe badly interpreted because some of them make no sense. And I'm not going to get into a bunch of this because it's spoiler material and I don't want to spoil it for anybody. So let me just say with Barmag and everything that they wrote, if you want to see what they wrote, it's on the Twitter thread for the podcast last week. Yeah, I agree with a lot of it. I do think a lot of those leaks from Jedi Paxis and MakingStarWars.net are legit, but I also think that there's a lot of missing connective tissue and context. We do not even see close to the full story. All right, Jen G, Jen J.I., says this, great podcast. Kylo / Ben has become my favorite Star Wars character out of all of them, so seeing him redeemed is great, but having him die would suck. I find it hard to believe they're going to redeem him and kill him off, but who knows? Something I just read in Claudia Gray's Master and Apprentice is a ship that meant hope, and I think that hope resonates in all things Star Wars. It's a common thread. So for me, redemption for Ben represents that hope. The leaks bum me out on some level with the Kylo ones, but time has passed, and I still hope for the best. All right, Guitar Dead writes this, and thank you, Jen J, for the comment. I, too, agree with a lot of those sentiments. Guitar Dead writes this, I was lucky as a kid to see the original trilogy in theaters when they made the special editions. All have gotten to see every Star Wars movie in theaters, so I'm excited to see how it ends. Me too. I remember going to see the special edition at the Cinerama Dome in Orange County, with my buddy Jeff Shamrock, who I went to the Academy of Radio Broadcasting with. Real name Jeff Gibbons, but he went by Jeff Shamrock. And I'll never forget, it was one of the funniest moments, even though I abhor people that yell out in movies. But we were seeing A New Hope Special Edition for the first time, and the first time that Obi-Wan Kenobi says, "The Force will be with you." Right? He yells out, "Oh, Blake, it's on now!" And it was just one of those moments that the whole place cheered and laughed. It was such a great moment. He's a good guy. All right, 2 more comments, and then we'll wrap up the show this week. Across the Stars says this: I love the comment made by Aunt Vesuvi when she said, "We've seen redemption with Vader becoming Anakin again, paid for through his death, but we haven't yet seen salvation and how one lives with their transgressions." A very poignant observation, and this is exactly why what I hope to see with Ben. And adding reverse Amidala to the mix, and we get to see Rey and Ben do the things that Anakin and Padme were not able to. To me, this would be the only kind of ending that would make sense. Yeah, and I tend to agree. It's going to be very interesting to see that's an understatement, what J.J. Abrams ends up doing with Ben Solo at the end of this film. All right, one more. Brett writes this: Our heroes are together. Kylo will turn from the dark side. The Emperor is back. All of the majestic shots like Rey and Kylo in the throne room. That Star Destroyer coming up from underneath the water. I would go on for another hour, but I won't. Thanks, John, for another hour and a half audio bliss experience. Thank you. And the excitement we both share for Episode 9. May the Force be with you. May the Force be with you always. And that's it for the show this week. Thank you so much for spending some time listening or watching me ramble on about Star Wars. I do greatly appreciate it. You can always email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Leave a comment on YouTube as well. And as always, if you want to support the show and you haven't yet, pick up a copy of the first 2 books in my EMBARK science fiction space opera trilogy. They're available right now on Amazon.com in ebook, audiobook narrated by me, and paperback. And depending on which version you buy, you get other ones either free or at a discounted rate. The reviews have been great for the books, and if you've read them and you enjoyed them and haven't left a review yet, please go to Amazon.com and leave a positive review for either of the book. I really, really would appreciate it. But that's the way you can go and support the show. Gift it to a friend. The ebook is 99 cents. They're discounted right now. Will be for the next few days online. Both the ebooks are just 99 cents, and you can gift them to a friend right there on the sale page at Amazon.com. So I hope you go and pick up a copy if you haven't done so already, or go and leave a positive review. I really would appreciate it. We'll be back again next week. Oh, and one last thing before I go, I totally forgot. So Greg Grunberg, who plays Snap Wexley, put out a tweet over the weekend saying that there was big Star Wars news coming, and then didn't say what it was. We should be getting the international trailer for The Rise of Skywalker like any day now. I'm shocked that we haven't got it yet. And with it comes brand new footage. And a lot of times that's the footage that they end up using in different iterations in the TV spots. So the international trailer for The Force Awakens came out on October 31st? No. That was The Last Jedi. Because The Last Jedi released its trailer earlier. And then The Force Awakens came out roughly the same time of the month that the final Rise of Skywalker trailer did. And that debuted on November 2nd. So we should be getting, I'm looking at my phone right now to make sure that it hasn't dropped in the middle of the show. We should be getting that international trailer any moment now. And it normally includes new footage. And I'm wondering if the international trailer is going to resemble the trailer that Jason Ward over at MakingStarWars.net said it was going to be. There were some very specific shots in there. So keep an eye on my blaster on Twitter, at Jon Justice or at @MyNerdWorld. Both of those places on the blaster app as well. And as soon as it's up, I'll be putting out some content and probably doing a new bonus podcast of breaking it all down. I would assume that we'll definitely get it before next weekend's show. So here's hoping. So have yourself a great week. Thank you so much again for checking out the show. If you've enjoyed the video on YouTube, hit that that subscribe button, like the video. And same thing if you're listening to the podcast, depending on what platform you're pulling the podcast from. And now here is Obi-Wan Kenobi to take us out. Talk to you again next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.